I was standing at the long table with wine when the master came too close. His fingers seemed to touch me by accident, but I knew there are no accidents here. I felt my breath freeze in my chest, because behind us other slaves and servants were walking. If someone noticed his gesture or my reaction, punishment would await me, not him. His gaze was heavy, demanding. There was not a drop of tenderness in it. He smiled at his guests, and with his other hand, as if testing how far he could go without saying a word. I knew I had to stand still, as if nothing was happening. But my heart was beating so loudly that I was afraid the whole hall would hear it. From that evening on, a secret was born in me that I cannot reveal even now. And yet, once my life had been completely different. I was born by a river, where in the mornings it smelled of bread and damp earth. My mother sang while washing clothes. My father brought home firewood, and said that laughter was the best medicine. My childhood was simple and bright until strangers crossed our threshold and took us away forever. Since then I knew my body belonged to others, but inside me there was something they could not take away. Memories, smells, images of childhood, and also a secret that I keep, and that one day I will have to reveal. But it all began on that very night when the master first allowed himself too much. Then I understood my life would never be the same again. At dinner, when the house was filled with the smell of wine and roasted meat, the master sat at the head of the table, his voice loud. He laughed and poured the glasses. I stood nearby, holding the jug, and tried to be invisible. But each time I leaned to fill his cup, his hand was too close. It seemed like an accident, but I knew there are no accidents. The mistress sat opposite. Her gaze was cold and sharp, like the blade of a knife. She said nothing, but I felt that she saw more than she should. I tried to lower my eyes, but my heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed the whole hall could hear it. After dinner, I went out into the yard, hoping to breathe in fresh air and calm the trembling in my hands. The sky was dark, and a light was still burning in the window upstairs. I knew the mistress had not yet gone to bed. It seemed to me that her silhouette flickered for a moment behind the curtain. I wondered, why did she say nothing then, at the table? What was she planning? That night, I hardly slept. In my head her eyes kept turning, a gaze full of unspoken words, and his hand that lingered on my waist. I felt that between the two of them a game was beginning, and in this game I was only a pawn. The next morning the women at the well whispered. I heard my name and laughter hidden behind their palms. They said that the mistress had long noticed how the master lingered on me with his eyes, that this could turn into trouble if I was not careful. I stayed silent, as if I heard nothing, but inside everything tightened. Could it be that the whole house already knew what I tried to hide even from myself? Sometimes it seemed to me that I was going mad. Each of his steps, each turn of his head, I caught them and read them as if they were secret messages. He could pass by and not say a word, but one glance was enough to knock my breath away. And then I caught myself thinking, what if this is only my imagination? What if everything I take for signs is just a game of fancy? But then why did the mistress look at me as if I were her enemy? In the evening, I was washing the floor in the large living room. He entered unexpectedly, came too close, and leaned as if he wanted to say something. But instead of words, his fingers slid along my hand. I flinched, but he only gave a quiet chuckle and left, leaving me with a wildly pounding heart. It all happened so quickly that no one had time to notice. No one but me. But those very seconds turned my whole life upside down. A day later, the mistress called me into her room. She sat at the mirror, adjusting her hair and looking at her reflection as if speaking to it. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but in every word there was a threat. She asked if I did not think I was too often near her husband. I bowed and answered that I only fulfilled my duties. She smiled at the corners of her lips and said, "Remember, in this house nothing remains secret." I left, barely breathing. My heart was falling somewhere into the abyss. Now I knew that the mistress had not only noticed, she had decided to watch me. That night again, I lay sleepless. I understood. The secret I keep is becoming too dangerous. And sooner or later, one of us will take a step after which there will be no way back. Why did the mistress say, then, that soon the house would become quieter without me? These words sounded casually, in the course of conversation, but I felt in them a cold warning. She was sitting on the veranda, drinking sweet tea, and watching as I swept the floor nearby. In her voice there was no anger, only a slight mockery, as if she knew something that I did not. I froze for a moment, but then continued my work, pretending that I had heard nothing. But inside, everything collapsed. All day I caught her gaze. Sometimes it was so heavy that I wanted to hide. She seemed to play with me, throwing either a cold smile or a silence that frightened more than a scream. And in the evening I heard other women at the well saying that the mistress was going to sell someone from among us. I did not dare to ask who exactly, but every cell of my body cried that it was about me. The master behaved differently. He began to appear more often than before. I recognized his steps in the corridor immediately. He could speak to me as if we were alone, although others were in the room. His words had no direct meaning, but each tone, each glance said more than necessary. I feared these moments, and at the same time awaited them, though I knew it was a road to nowhere. Sometimes at night, I heard the mistress quarrel with him. Her voice was sharp, his stubborn. I did not understand the words, but I felt that I was the reason. My shadow became the cause of their disputes, and because of that, it became unbearably heavy for me. What would happen next? Could it be that I myself, unwillingly, had become a weapon in the hands of others? One morning they sent me to help in the garden. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine, and for a moment I forgot everything. But suddenly he appeared nearby, as if from nowhere. His hand touched mine when I handed over the basket. He held that moment, looking straight into my eyes. Everything around seemed to freeze, and only the rustling of branches covered our breath. But in that same second, I felt someone's gaze from the house. I jerked my hand back sharply, but it was too late. The mistress stood at the window. Since then I knew she would not stop. She was watching, she was waiting, and sooner or later she would strike. Sometimes the women by the fire whispered that the mistress was too proud to tolerate such things, that perhaps she would decide to get rid of me, so as not to see my face beside him. I heard their words, but pretended not to understand. And at night, lying on the hard mat, I thought only of one thing. How much time do I have left here? And yet there were moments when I forgot everything. When his gaze met mine, when his steps slowed near me, when a casual touch turned into a secret promise. In those seconds, I felt alive. But with it I knew those very seconds could become the cause of my end. That evening, the mistress again called me to her. She looked long in the mirror, adjusting her hair and speaking as if to herself. Some things must be removed from the house before they turn into trouble. I stood silent, and in every one of her words I heard a sentence. When I left her room, my hands were trembling. I knew she was preparing something, and soon something would happen that would change my fate. Why did he enter the kitchen exactly then, when I was alone? I bent over the basin with dishes, the water still warm, and in the silence only the drops falling from my hands could be heard. The door swung open, and he appeared in the doorway. I shuddered, turned, and met his gaze. In that instant I understood. He had not come for wine or food. He came closer, his steps measured, as if everything around belonged only to him. I stepped back to the wall, but there was no space left. His hand touched my cheek, and I felt the smell of wine mixed with warm breath. I knew I could not resist, knew that any word would become my death. And yet my heart was beating so loudly that I feared it would betray me. The silence of the kitchen enveloped us. He leaned lower, and the air between us seemed to compress. It all happened so quickly, and so inevitably that I still do not know how long those minutes lasted. My body obeyed him, and my soul tried to run away, but there was no path. Only the wall behind my back and his shadow covering the light. When everything grew still, he looked at me as if nothing had happened, as if it were an ordinary evening, his ordinary choice. And then his voice became softer than ever. "You are not like the others," he said. "I will not allow anything bad to be done to you." These words tore me apart inside. I stood broken, but at the same time clung to every letter. I knew that his promise was not protection, but a new cage. And yet in that cage smoldered a spark of hope that perhaps he truly would not let me be sold, would not let me be thrown into foreign hands. After that night, his behavior changed. In public, he was cold, stern, and no one would have thought there was anything between us. But every glance of his reminded me of the kitchen. Every step in the corridor made my heart beat faster. And his words, spoken in a whisper, lived in me as a forbidden secret. I understood. This secret would sooner or later come out. And then my life would change forever. Why did the mistress call me to her room that evening, when she usually never did? She was sitting at the mirror, her hands slowly running through her hair, and her eyes in the reflection were cold and attentive. I entered quietly, trying not to meet her gaze. She pretended not to notice me, and only after a long pause she said, "Some things must be removed from the house in time, otherwise they begin to smell worse than spilled wine." Her voice was calm, but every word sounded like a threat. I stood with my eyes lowered and kept silent, and inside everything tightened with fear. She knew, or at least she suspected. I felt that with each day her suspicions grew. The next day he again found a moment to remain near. His hand barely touched mine, and I already knew that it was a repetition of that night I tried not to think about. But now it was different. His words became bolder. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I hold everything in my hands. You belong to me, and I will not allow anyone to take you away." I shuddered. His promises sounded like protection and sentence at the same time. On the one hand, there was hope in them that he would keep me from being sold. On the other hand, I understood. If the mistress decided otherwise, her anger would fall only on me. The women by the fire began whispering louder. They threw sideways glances when I passed and laughed behind my back. They knew more than they should have. In their words, there was envy and malice. Now, my secret was ceasing to be a secret. It was turning into a weapon that could be used against me at any moment. And the mistress called me more and more often for trifles. To bring a cup, to adjust a dress, to stand nearby while she spoke with guests. Each time her eyes followed me unceasingly, and I felt like a bird in a cage, looked at in expectation of when it would drop a feather. One evening, when he was near, the mistress came unexpectedly close. She laid her hand on his shoulder and smiled, but her eyes were fixed on me. In that smile there was more poison than in any words. And then I understood. She had decided to test us both. That night I lay without sleep. I thought of his words, "You belong to me," and of her cold smile. I understood. Soon the moment would come when I would have to make a choice. Would I remain in the shadow of his promises, or would the mistress force me to disappear from this house forever? And what would happen to me then? Several days passed. I was kneeling, stacking baskets, when I heard his steps. They were heavy, confident, like those of a man to whom every board of this house and every soul inside belonged. I raised my head and met his gaze. In it there was no warmth, no secret promises, only a cold desire that did not ask for consent. He approached swiftly, as if time shrank into a single second. I tried to retreat, but the wall was behind me. His hand gripped me so strongly that the air was knocked from my chest. The barn smelled of dust, hay, and dampness, and that smell forever soaked into my memory. He did not say a word. Only the creak of old boards and my uneven breathing broke the silence. It all happened, roughly, almost like a mockery of my weakness. I felt that to him I was not a woman, but a thing that could be broken and then put back in place. My heart screamed, but my lips stayed closed. I was afraid that if I made even a sound, he would become harsher still. Tears would not come. My eyes remained dry, as if there were no strength left inside to cry. In his every movement, I heard mockery, and with every second hatred was born in me. When he finally stepped back, I remained on the cold floor, my hands clenched into fists. He straightened, adjusted his clothes, and looked at me as if nothing had happened, as if it were his right, as if I were a piece of furniture to be used and then left. The door closed behind him, and the barn filled again with silence. Only then did I allow myself to tremble. I pressed my palms to my chest, trying to warm myself, but the cold sat deep inside. I knew. After this, I could never look at him the same again. His promises were lies, his words of protection, deception. He did not want to keep me safe. He wanted to own me. And it was in that moment that my decision was born. I would no longer stay here. I would no longer allow him to touch me. Let the road be dark. Let each minute of escape risk my life. I would leave nonetheless. For the first time in a long while I felt strength within me. Not from hope, not from his words, but from hatred, which became my spark. The night when he thought he had broken me became the night when I decided to flee. Why was it that in that very night I felt that the walls of the house had become a cage, and the air inside it, poison? I lay on the hard mat, listening to every rustle. My heart beat so loudly that it seemed it would betray me before I even took my first step. After the barn, nothing remained in me but the determination to leave. His hands were the final boundary. Now I knew. If I stayed, there would be nothing left of me at all. I rose, trying not to make the board creak. In the darkness, the moonlight broke through the cracks in the wall, drawing silvery lines on the floor. I walked barefoot, so that the sound would not betray me. Each breath was like a scream, each shadow like an eye watching me. Behind the house there was a garden. There, where the jasmine smelled especially strong, I stopped, feeling my hands tremble. In my memory his face appeared when he said, "You belong to me." Those words sounded in me like a sentence. And at the same time I heard my mother's voice from distant childhood. "No one owns your soul." I approached the well. Women sometimes gathered there, and I knew among them were those who saw more than they spoke. I whispered to one of them, old and wise, that I could no longer stay. She looked at me for a long time. Her eyes glimmered in the darkness. "If you leave, do not look back," she said. "And remember, your secret is your strength." Those words struck me like a bell. She knew, or at least suspected. I squeezed her hand and then stepped again into the night. The road led to the forest. Every bush seemed an ambush, every rustle the steps of an overseer. I feared that the mistress was watching from the window, that her eyes glowed in the dark. But fear was no longer my master. It became fuel for my legs. I felt something new rising in my chest. It was not hope. It was fury that pushed me forward. I knew ahead might be the unknown, cold hunger, but it was better than living as a captive of other hands and other malice. And yet, as I left, I carried with me not only fear. I carried my secret, a secret I dared not speak aloud, but which one day would become my weapon. The night was thick, the moon hidden behind clouds, and only my steps led me out of the house where I had left everything except myself. I did not know if I would see another dawn, but I knew one thing: I would not return. I walked along the forest path, and each step echoed in my chest. The night hid me, but it could not hide my thoughts. The secret I kept burned stronger than a wound. I could not tell it to anyone, because in it lay my weakness and my strength at once. On that first night in the kitchen, he made me his, not asking, not giving a choice. And soon I realized that a life had begun inside me. Foreign blood, foreign power, foreign sin, all intertwined in me. I hated him, but in the silence of nights, I heard a faint beat that belonged neither to him, nor to the mistress, nor to this house. It was mine, my child. That secret kept me alive when my hands dropped, when fear suffocated, when the mistress's gaze burned through me. I told no one, neither the women at the well, nor those who shared bread with me by the fire. I stayed silent because I knew if they found out, they would tear me apart among themselves. Some would judge, others would envy, a third would sell this truth to the mistress. Now, leaving into the night, I knew I was running not only for myself. I was running for the one growing inside me. For this life not to know his hands, nor her hatred. I walked barefoot over the cold ground, and every scratch reminded me I was still alive. I did not know if I would reach freedom. Perhaps they would catch me at dawn. Perhaps my steps would end before the sun rose over the fields. But I knew one thing. Now I had a purpose. And if I fell, it would be only on the path to freedom. I still hear that bell in my ears, but now it sounds differently. Not as a command to work, but as a call to a new life, to something no one could ever take from me. Here is my truth. Here is my secret.